We had an amazing conversation with Rob Bradley, who's a senior VP, digital revenue strategy and operations at CNN International. He's been in the business for like 2 decades and he had some unbelievable insights.
Of course, there will be some other disruption. I'm sure there will be some negative parts of some of this rise of AI, but at least by understanding it, at least by trying to use it, be at the forefront of it, you give yourself a better chance of winning, that's for sure, rather than fighting it and being slow.
Hi, this is Michael Waits and welcome back to the Asia Tech Podcast. Today, we are joined by Rob Bradley, a Senior Vice President, Digital Revenue Strategy and Operations at CNN International Commercial. This should be a good one. Rob, thank you so much for coming to the show. Let's give our listeners a little bit of your background just for some context.
Well, it's great to be here, Michael. Thanks for inviting me. Appreciate it. My background, the way that I consider myself is a commercial leader, really, first and foremost. So I'm probably not as techie as some of your guests, you could say. The way that I sort of view technology and the sort of background I have is, ultimately I drive the business towards hitting a number, a revenue goal, in this instance, predominantly through advertising sales. However, as we know, the media industry, is very much now a data industry, you could say, a technology industry. It has to deal with all these different endpoints where audiences consume our content. So we have to use technology to meet our goals. So for me, it's about, driving a strategy, utilizing technology, particularly operations and data-driven technologies to hit commercial outcomes.
That's awesome. And can you just broaden it out a little bit for me? Because I want to get back to this tech thing. I also want to get a little historical for people and for you, because I think that's going to be fun. Talk to me exactly, like, what does digital revenue strategy and operations mean at CNN International Commercial?
I mean, it's a mouthful of a title. It's got too many words in it, so it is confusing. But ultimately, the strategy piece is like listening to the market, and do we have our clients ultimately and consumers and how they do we have the right solutions and go-to-market strategy to win business? So win advertising budgets from our clients. So how we present ourselves, the commercial solutions that we present to them, are we going to win, against some of our competitors and other places that our clients can spend money on advertising to reach an audience? The operations part is very much a technical operations team. So this is a group of people that, can follow the sun around the world. I have in a number of different countries around the world that ultimately are using different platforms to deliver the ads that we have, to understand who our audiences are, to make sure they're seeing the right kind of advertising, to make sure that we're meeting our clients' KPIs and goals that they have to meet their advertising goals, their campaign goals, and basically making sure we deliver what we say we will for our clients. So there's a big delivery piece, but the whole industry is full of data now. So a lot of it is making sure we deliver, but then we prove what we've done has worked. So there's a big part of that evidence-based delivery as well.
Awesome. Okay, I want to do a little bit of history, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
And I'm sure I'm older than you because I'm older than almost everybody that I know. But I think you'll know this because I think if you're exactly, because I think if you're working at CNN, if you've been in the media industry for a long time, and you have for almost 2 decades, you will know this because I'm sure you and your teams have talked about this over time. This idea that the tech or that disruption in the media industry is new is not true. I remember, and I'll go back to 1972 when I was 7 years old, right, when HBO was founded and first released. I was only 7, so I don't remember that, but I do remember in 1975, one of my buddies in New Jersey saying, I'm going to be able to buy this box and watch movies at home. And it felt like magic. It really did. But it was completely disruptive. And I thought, what are you going to do? You're not going to go to the movie theater? Like, how does this even work? And he said it was cable TV. But just think about like being a 9-year-old in 1974, and thinking, they're going to pull a cable to everybody's house, just all this stuff, right? It seemed really disruptive. And then when I was older, so when I was 15 in 1980, that's when CNN started. And I remember thinking, cable news network. It almost sounds quaint when you think about it today, right? Because that's how it started. And there was some dude in Georgia named Ted Turner. Yeah. It's like, what are you doing? And why is it on 24 hours a day? But I just wanted to set this up that like this disruption that's happening is not new. It's been going on for almost 50 years, right? When I was a kid, ABC, CBS, NBC, and now all of that is gone, right? So can you talk to me about automation and data and how that changed the game 15 years ago and how it's just completely changing it now?
Yeah, so ultimately, technologies in the way that audiences, so people, all of us, people listening to this, consume their content is ultimately driving, changes in how media companies operate. So it comes down to kind of human behavior almost, right? How are humans behaving with the technology that's available to them in the way that they can consume content? So if you think of that cable innovation of cable, and Ted Turner thinking, I think news has an important place in the world. I think, there's a purpose there. I now have this platform that means, hey, I could own a whole channel. And actually, I think there's always something going on in the world that people should know about. And I have a distribution for it now. I'm going to embrace that. That was like real innovation at the time. And then he did the same for kids, right? With Cartoon Network and so on. So that is real innovation, nearly 45 years ago, as you said. But you fast forward and you think about the constant disruption. When I joined, yes, 2 decades ago, but when I did start in media, I was selling quarter page ads or whole page ads if I was lucky in a local magazine in a small town called Eastbourne on the south coast of England, straight out of university. I did a sports science degree, which is completely different to what I do now. But, it was, the media industry was full of, quite fun, gregarious, I think sports people that are, quite, they like working as a team and they enjoy social life. Media represents all of that. So it was good fun. But I was waiting by the fax machine for a deal to come in, right? I might have even posted the contract to someone, right? That's not that long ago. So over that next 10 years, what really happened was the rise of programmatic advertising and data-driven advertising alongside the rise, of course, of social media and platforms. A platform is a bit of a word I'd like to delete in the industry, to be honest, because like, what is a platform? Of course, you could say Meta's a platform, you could say CNN's a platform, cable's a platform, whatever it is. But, different touch points, let's say, with audiences around the world. But from an advertising perspective, my specialism, I was a salesperson. By then, I had moved to companies, in London, bigger companies, worked at News Corp, worked at IDG, which is now Foundry, big American corporates I've kind of always been at. There was this thing called programmatic advertising and data management platforms. This is like 2008, let's say, 2009, 10. No one was doing it. And, I was like, this sounds pretty interesting. I can sell more ads more efficiently using technology to define who an audience is and make sure I'm serving the right ad to the right person at the right time. The holy grail of advertising. That's what advertisers want, right? So if you think of using technology to do that, and just as a salesperson, I said, I'll do it. No one even was really that interested. And fast forward to today, up to 80% of ads are traded in this way. And for people that don't know, programmatic advertising is the automated buying of audiences against data sets on media platforms or social media and so on and so forth. Long answer, but the last thing the way I'd link it to today though, and why that's constant innovation, when that happened, everyone was like, sales, we don't need salespeople anymore, right? Because the machines are going to sell the ads, yeah? And automation has taken over. But let me fast forward to today. Actually, what you've got now is people like me, who was a salesperson, and my team, who now have to be data experts, technologists. Everyone on the sales team needs to understand what data management platforms we have. And actually, we've embraced the machines to do what they do best, which is scale. And then we've embraced the human side of creativity when it comes to storytelling and making content for our clients. So it's just changed what we've done. That was 15 years ago. So it's not the first time automation's come in.
No, not at all. And so that brings up two things for me. The first is, you said 15 years ago, nobody else was doing this. Like, to me, I'm maybe more of a techie than you are. For me, I've been watching this forever, and it just seems like this kind of programmatic advertisement has been going on since I was a kid, which is not true. But maybe I was just following it. But when you jumped in to introduce this as a non-tech guy, I guess my question is, what was the tipping point for you? What did you see? Like, how did you see this, and why did you know that it mattered? And then the second part of that question is, what did your bosses or your colleagues say? Like, this guy's nutty, or, hey, this could be a great idea. Do you know what I mean?
I had a great boss, a guy called Dan Shaw, who was ahead of his time within this space. And actually, the reason why I heard of a data management platform, why I was very early, and launched, what we believe is the first publisher trading desk in the UK at this point, is because IDG Ventures had actually invested in a platform called Crux. So I heard about it early, right? So I always say this to people on my team: you hear about something that's interesting and you think it's early, and you believe in some of this disruption, embrace that,
Let
embrace
me
it.
know and let me know.
So
Yeah.
I suppose motivated from a career point of view, motivated from delivering from our clients in a sales world. If I could be better for them, I'm going to hit my bonus. All of these things. And if you can use technology to hit those same goals, but in a smarter, more efficient way, then why not? So actually, yeah, it did feel like a little bit of a skunk works in the corner. I was onboarding these tech platforms myself as a salesperson, right? And dealing with these people. And to be honest, hardly any of them worked in the way that they said they would at that point. The industry was like figuring it out, right? So, the PowerPoint was a little bit different to the delivery, let's say, from some of the platforms. They've obviously sorted that out now, so many years later. But, it was just a case of believing in something could be disruptive and making it work for you and your business is kind of what I say. And I think that's my firm philosophy around technology in the media industry is you have to understand it to see if it can work and make it work for you rather than letting someone else disrupt you and being behind the game.
In a way, it was a great time to be introduced to it, right? Because the platforms weren't delivering as they said they were. I mean, all this vaporware, Microsoft was super famous for this, right? They'd be like, we can do this. And you're like, well, it doesn't really do that. But still, you get to test a whole bunch of different things. And in a way, you can't fail. But it's also a good life lesson, right? This idea of just because it's new doesn't mean it's bad. It could be great. And if we do 7 of them, if one of them works, we win, right? It's a great thing to teach to your junior employees.
Absolutely.
The other question, though, is this, because you said, and I think about this a lot in the context of AI, which we can talk about later, but you're basically describing a hybrid mechanism, right? Use the tech for the data gathering, the data analysis, the data stuff that it understands, the things that it can do way better than a human can, but leave the creative side to people who now have way more time to think about what should the content be. And I'm curious, as you got to the programmatic side and it started becoming more efficient and you started to be able to get audience, right, very specifically, did it then change the way you developed content around it? And did it segment stuff even more than you had expected?
Yeah, 100%. I think the two main outcomes of how we changed our strategy and what we drove were one, I've kind of touched on it already, was everyone had to get a lot smarter. So I think the whole industry got smarter, which is exciting. So we upskilled ourselves, right? So the technology didn't make us lose jobs. It actually made us more valuable. Salaries went up, right? Because you're not just talking about being a salesperson that just has to take someone to lunch, have a couple of drinks and make them sign a contract, right? You have to really understand technology. So, the industry got smarter and I think the industry, on the whole got paid better as a result. So technology allowed us to upskill, which when we get onto AI, I think is an interesting discussion. And then on the other side, it's, well, I remember going, I was 32, 9 years ago, when I joined Turner, and, I was invited to an executive offsite in New York. I was so excited, right? It was like my career just suddenly bumped up, right? And, I did a presentation to, 100 execs from around the world in New York. And, and I had these slides on what programmatic does. And I said I can sell 1 billion ads with 3 people, right? And they were like, isn't that like, the ads people were. Not everyone in that room were ads people. And
Right.
I didn't even mean it to be shocking. I was just telling the truth, right? I was just like, I can sell 1 billion ads with 3 people. And, at the time, I was like public enemy number 1 from a few people around the company.
You definitely were.
However, the next slide I had was what we actually do is tell stories at this company, right? We're storytellers. We're the best storytellers in the world. From HBO to Sopranos, which is still the best thing ever made, right? In my opinion. There's a few, I don't know. Succession might be up there.
Maybe, just so you know, I've never seen one episode of The Sopranos and not one episode of Succession because I was living outside the United States for the last 30 something years and there was
Oh,
no HBO outside the United
oh,
States.
wow.
I know what The
Okay.
Sopranos is, but I've never seen it. So
Okay,
please go
well,
ahead.
there's time. You need a lot of time because it's long. But Succession, I would say to you or any of your listeners that haven't watched it. I mean, if they're interested in the media industry, it is unbelievably good. It's exceptional. But we're storytellers, right? And if you focus on what brands do from an advertising perspective, what they really want to do is get a story across to a consumer about what their product is, why it suits them, why they should invest in that company, and then today even more so, why the purpose of that company, which could be around sustainability, climate, tech to solve problems, should align with that consumer's own beliefs and brands and so on, and what they believe and what they want from their brands. So really, we should be focusing on that. Let's sell the billion ads over here and let's work with our clients to tell their story, which is more like we're a video company, right? Let's make videos with them, with branded content, which allows them to tell stories, sponsored content, a content led sale, which is much more around creativity. Yes, we have data feeding what content works and all of this piece, and there's AI involved in that now as well, of course. But it's very different than just selling a box on a page or a box on a screen, which is still very important. But we let the machines, we balance the machines versus the storytelling part.
I want to go back and tell you that this idea of everybody got smarter is something that really resonates with me, and I'll tell you why. On the trading desk, we had the same thing happening. In the same way you said I could sell a billion ads with 3 people, I said to my bosses when algorithmic trading started, which is no different than programmatic advertising, excuse me, I was like, we could do 10 times more business, lower commissions, and make way more money. And I was like you, I was like persona non grata because they were like, really? And I was like, yeah. And for 7 months, I'll tell you this, for 7 months at Goldman Sachs, I executed every single trade by myself using technology. And the only reason why we had to hire a couple more people was because I was starting to get carpal tunnel syndrome, because I was
I've got
clicking
that
too
too, by
much.
the way. I know
I'm
exactly what
serious.
that
Like,
is.
yeah, you can't make it up. But the point was, we literally did way more business and made way more money. We went from an $8 million a year business to a $135 million a year business because of technology. And the idea that the same thing was happening on the ad desk, essentially, at CNN or Warner Brothers, is not shocking to me, but interesting that it was kind of going on all at the same time. Because we're sitting there in our little bubble thinking like we're geniuses over here doing all this cool stuff, and you're sitting there doing the same thing and taking the same trip to New York that I was taking from Tokyo and having the same conversation. So I think that's actually kind of cool. I want to ask you this though. Talk to me a little bit more about branded content and sponsored content and how that's changed the kind of tenor of content that gets served to people, right? Because I think that's really interesting because that's a big difference from like the 50s, 60s, and 70s, right?
Yeah, it is, and I think it can. Yeah, the industry has a job to do in making people aware of what's driving it, driving I suppose an ad run business today. I mean, look, the advertising spaces across our platform. So let's just say it's web, app, CTV now, so connected TVs, and still traditional linear TV or cable. Um, all of that is still vital to our business. And sometimes we are just an audience where a client has made an ad to get in front of an eyeball, right? We are that still. However, to really make our commercial model work now, we need to do so much more. And that is where branded and sponsored content come in. So branded content is where, let's take CNN. CNN has a tone of voice. It has a trust against what it says. It has a style of production. It has a global audience and global out capabilities when it comes to production. We can light up teams anywhere in the world. Very few people in the way that we can. And what branded content does is it's labeled as advertising, but ultimately it's a video or a piece of written content or an infographic where the brand actually has a voice on how it's made, the content that's in there. You can feature a device. Let's say it's for a mobile company, and you can be very advertising with it. Let's say, right? However, ultimately, what they're doing is they're buying CNN's tone of voice and style of production, and then the audience that it reaches in the back of it. A good example would be, if take Samsung, one of our biggest clients. We made an incredible piece of branded content about the accessibility of their televisions. For how it could enable the hard of hearing to interact with their devices ultimately. We found a gentleman that went viral for doing sign language on the side of a stage while Beyonce was performing, told his story. The product is featured throughout it, but ultimately, it's a human-led story. It delivers some sort of emotional response when you see it. It's quite motivating, but it still has the brand in it. The TV. The reason why I'm telling this story is it's a very authentic, interesting story. Still, ultimately, it's advertising though.
Where does that get published though?
It gets published on the site and it's labeled as partner content or branded content. So it's labeled in a way which is different to every other type of content across our site, but also it goes into social. So this is where we make the social platforms work for us and we push it out across social. So that's where we can make money out of Meta and, Google and TikTok and all these other platforms that we have to be on today because our audience exists there.
Yeah, interesting. So you produce this content specifically for, in this case, Samsung, right? Which sounds a very interesting story. The guy doing sign language while Beyonce is singing, is performing. And then you take that, you cut it up or do whatever to it, and then you put it on social, and you also put it on your own website. But then you link back to it as well?
Yeah. It's pushed out as much. We have to guarantee engagements against it, right? This is a commercially paid for video. So we're going in our own environment first and foremost. But then, like with our editorial content, we have to go into social platforms because that's where audiences are today. That's where they're getting a lot of their content from. The reason why you would do that with CNN is, the social platforms and the media space is incredibly cluttered, right? It's super noisy. It's so noisy. So if you have CNN and it's aligned with another brand that someone might know, it cuts through that noise, as well as being a story that can resonate with an audience. So it's about cutting through using the brand. So it still comes back to CNN as a brand that cuts through the noise and is trusted.
So what is the creative process like? And I guess, I don't know if this is controversial or not, but does this mean that you're disintermediating, these big advertising agencies, which seem to me, you don't have to comment on this if you don't want to, but it seems to me like they're an anathema, right? Because you're the ones, the media companies, whether it's CNN or any other media company, are the ones dealing directly with the brand. And you must have your own creative division, right? Because like you said, you can serve now to all of these platforms. Internally, you must have your own creatives that go right to the brand and leapfrog kind of the ad agencies, I'm guessing, yeah? So internally, you have this.
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
It's actually quite a symbiotic world, all of it still. And I'll explain why. It's a mixed... it's mixed in some instances. It's brand direct, and some instances it's still for the agencies and execute through the agencies, and there's a strong role that they play. However, I often say, I sort of touched on it earlier. CNN can't just be a media company anymore. We are a media buyer, right? We buy media across social, right, against this video. That on branded content. We are a creative agency. We have a full service creative agency called CNN Create, which is a huge part of our business. Up to 70% of our revenue touches that agency. It creates content, from TVC ads or banners right to this branded content video series I mentioned. We're a data company and a research company and all these things, right? So, but the agencies, still become very important when it comes to execution, management of client, administration, reporting. The contacts and relationships they have with media owners are very important. And we're not always making a content. Sometimes, of course, just the ads that our clients have are made by creative agencies, and then media is bought through agencies as well. So it's all mixed and works together in some respect in a way where everyone plays a strong role.
How do I phrase this the right way? I have this phrase that I like to use, that no one succeeds alone, no matter how big you are, right? And again, you said there's this symbiotic relationship with external ad agencies and stuff like that. And with everything being digital today, how do you use technology at scale to build and enhance existing partnerships and new partnerships? And what does like an ideal partnership look like to CNN?
That's a good question. So an ideal partnership is one where I've spoke about kind of research and reporting a couple of times, right? Our best relationships, some of our clients have been with us 20 years, right? And they're spending a lot of money each year. That's because we're proving it works, and because even if it's, let's say it's an agency's involved and a brand involved, often if it's a bigger deal, the brand is involved and the agency and the media owner, right? So all of you are involved, because if it's including a lot of content, branded content, or they're sponsoring a TV show and sponsoring a digital series, whatever it is, they're really going to want to know what it's about, who the characters are, what reporting they expect. So you need a deep relationship with everyone in that buying chain, let's say, because ultimately the technology enables a lot of data and insight from what you've done, right? You might have made 6 digital videos, right, that you post across your own website and then you post all across social. You not only will say, well, actually, these 1 and 2 got the most views now. Now you can understand the semantics. How do people feel about that video? You can get emotional response information from what people have commented, or the likes, or the keywords, right? You can understand whether positive or negative. You can understand, which bit really popped or which characters popped across this. So you're then learning, okay, we're going to put that into the creative process. And the next videos are going to be even better, even more on point, even more influential, let's say. And we're going to learn about what audiences work and resonated. And then, you can do things like lookalike modeling, where it's like, hey, these guys really, really loved this video, right? But these guys look a lot like these guys and girls and everything. So then you can expand that audience. So you're constantly learning. And that means you need a real trusted, open, honest relationship about what works, what doesn't, so that you can always get better and better. And the technology enables that to scale through doing it efficiently.
Do you worry about audience capture at all?
What do you mean? What do you mean by audience capture?
So like where the audience then ends up driving all of, because you serve stuff to the audience, you have all this data. So back in the 1970s and the 1960s, you had Nielsen, and Nielsen would put boxes in everybody's house and they'd be like, I love Happy Days. And they'd walk out of the living room and not watch it anymore, right?
Yeah.
You could do that today. You could put on a YouTube video and like walk out of the room in 5 devices in your house if you really wanted to support somebody. But I don't think a lot of people are doing that. There are ways to game it and ways not to. But I think at the end of the day, right, those are edge conditions. You can tell what people like and don't. But if you want to do something really creative and really different, you run the risk that your audience has already told you, I want to see this stuff. I believe in this thing. And does it limit at some level the creative aspect of it, where you're like, let's try this new thing? And the audience is like, we didn't ask for that.
Yeah.
That's audience capture. Yeah.
Yeah. I get it. I mean, CNN reaches 500 million households and people around the world, right? So you're starting with 500 million people. You've got we've got over 200 million people following us across social, just on CNN. Then you go into the Warner Brothers Discovery universe, right? And you're touching, the majority of people in the world at some point are seeing some sort of Warner content or have a touch point across social, and in the billions of people. So you're starting very wide. I suppose what data, and data management platforms and programmatic platforms allow you to do is, build tribes and understand who's interested in what and how they could consume and share content. The challenge actually, which goes into what is a big problem in the media industry, is assumptions around what people want, and technology creating echo chambers of what people might want, right? To reinforce their beliefs, which we've seen a huge problem, obviously, with fake news and echo chambers around conspiracy theories that people get themselves into, and all of the myriad of issues that changes. But then also from a brand, you could limit your potential audience, right? If you're going, too far in on it, it has to be this audience on this platform at this time of day, because you can do all that now. They need to see this ad, and then the next ad needs to be this ad. And it's like, well, actually, maybe you're cutting out, a huge amount of your potential audience, which could be both, on the consumer side or the B2B side. We do a lot of B2B spend because, let's take technology, right? I'm a sales leader, but I'm signing off budgets for technology platforms. probably more than a lot of people in the company, like tens and tens of platforms. But I'm not a CTO, right? If you're just targeting CTO for your platform, I mean, this is not a new story, right? Which is probably why you're laughing. But hey, I'm a commercial leader. If you want to get some technology in here, you need to hit me just as much as the CTO, just as much as the CDO, whatever it is. So, you need to make sure that you're sort of open and listening to the data, but open to not listening to the data sometimes, and maybe the more human side.
Exactly. And this gets back to this hybrid idea that we were talking about earlier. I see this all over the tech ecosystem. And I don't want to get to AI yet, but I do want to cover it. I want to ask you this, though. Where do like well-funded and kind of very targeted media companies fit in, if you don't mind me asking? Like the Daily Wire has like 3 million subscribers, right? And TYT has 6 million subscribers. And the Midas Touch Network has like almost 3, and they're growing pretty fast. Like, how do you deal with those guys? I'll use the term guys because they're mostly guys that run these companies. And does it matter? And do they inform anything that you end up doing? Do you learn anything from those guys? And if so, what is it?
Yeah, we have to be looking at what other people are doing constantly. Go back to what you said, Ted Turner launching a cable network. We're still around and still the biggest news company in the world on many metrics because we constantly innovate and disrupt ourselves, right? Sometimes it's hard because we're so big, and all those challenges that come with being in a corporate and so on. But we have to make sure we're looking at, again, human behavior, what they're interested in, what competitors are doing, where they're winning, or new startups, and see, again, can we make that work for us? So of course we're always doing that. But in terms of where those people have a place to play in the industry, I mean, humans are quite complex, right? You think of all the things you're into. I'm sure you're not just into podcasts and media, right? You're into many different things in technology, right? You've got all these hobbies, just like me, and there is room if you can fund them now. And I think subscription models and subscription emails mean that niche companies don't just have to rely on advertising, which is where they don't have scale. They're going to struggle, right, in some respects. That they can play a very important role in hitting, in hitting a person who's complex with many different things they may be interested, a specific niche of that person. So I think it very much complements what someone like CNN does. And I'm all for it. I think you've seen, I mean, the news space is interesting. Everyone might have judged whether CNN would still be around, still be as strong as we are when BuzzFeed was the hottest thing, Vice was the hottest thing, all of these different startups. And then you look at some of the challenges there. However, a bit different in a very niche startup.
Yeah, I would say this. I was laughing when you said BuzzFeed, and I can't remember the name of the other one because it probably doesn't matter anymore. What was the other one you said?
Vice.
Yeah, and Vice. The thing is, though, those guys were never going to be around for that long. I wished I had been a fly on the wall at CNN when those companies were there, just to be inside like the internal meetings, right? It was the same thing when I was at Goldman Sachs. You'd have all these little brokers pop up, right, going like, we're going to use this tech and we're going to disintermediate this. And you're just sitting there going, we've got a $25 billion balance sheet. And it's just going to be really hard to compete with that, as good as you are. Because the other question I was going to ask you is, and Microsoft used to do this all the time, if you have an M&A team, if you're really worried about somebody, I mean, I'm not telling you what to do or what you were doing, but like you just wave them in if they're that good. And if not, you just ignore them, because you're right. It's going to be really hard to get to the same scale as CNN and some of the other businesses,
it is hard,
particularly at the Warner level, right? Like that's hard.
Yeah, it is. And it starts kind of with something quite old school, which is like a brand. You go any coffee shop in the world, right? You say CNN, they know what you're talking about. So you start with that point. It doesn't mean we don't have challenges, though, right? So I don't want to be like it's all positive, because the challenges we have are not necessarily that BuzzFeed is. It's that our audience is now, consuming all our content in Meta, where we don't control the data there. We don't, we're arguably building an audience in someone else's platform and someone else's business model, right? That's a challenge. The challenge of some advertisers are avoiding news for their advertising at the moment. They're spending in social, where there could be all sorts of misinformation, but they're avoiding news, which is defunding news in some respect, which is a real big problem, because they're blocking and blunt kind of keywords that could be around I mean, it was a good example during the European Cup where words that were blocked, like football. I'm talking about the English term football,
I
soccer,
got it.
soccer.
I got it. I got it. Don't do it. Don't do that to me.
Yeah. Advertisers programmatically in a platform, you can put a word like strike or attack, right? And it will block all content that has strike and attack. But if you're talking about football or soccer, people are striking and attacking all the time.
Attacking all day.
All
Yeah, they
day,
should be.
or athletics, whatever it is. You're blocking
Yeah.
some of the most, hard-earned audiences on the internet and therefore you're blocking a lot of news content. So it's not like we don't have challenges, but and they're very real, but it's different than we're not worried about BuzzFeed coming to eat our lunch like perhaps we were a few years ago.
Yeah, it's funny. Most sports analogies are war analogies. Like George Carlin used to do this whole thing about the difference between baseball and football, right? In football, you have a bomb. In American football, in baseball, you have a fly. Like, it's just hilarious. But you're right. If those words get blocked, then you can't have the search for it. Then you can't get the ads around it and so what happens to news? And again, like, I remember when I was a kid, right? ABC, NBC, CBS, nightly news was on all at the same time, 7 o'clock at night or 6 o'clock, and then 11 o'clock, they do the late news. I never felt like they were that different. There was just like a different guy reading the news, and it was just like, did you want Peter Jennings or did you want Dan Rather? And they didn't seem to be saying anything that different. I can't believe I remember those names, by the way. That's right off the top of my head. But now it's so fragmented, and news used to be a loss leader, but now it's not anymore. Like, how has that changed the delivery of news and the trust around it as well, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, I suppose, look, I'm a commercial leader rather than an editorial leader.
No, I know.
Which,
but you still have to sell against it,
yeah,
right?
I do. And I think, look, there's a utility and purpose of news, which is vital. And I mean that. I mean it quite seriously, right? I may be a commercial leader, but everyone that wakes up in the morning and works with us, feels like there's a purpose to what we do. That could be someone delivering an ad campaign on a tech platform, or it could be a salesperson or editorial, obviously a journalist who on the front line. The reason being that there's kind of a utility to news, right? By uncovering what's going on in the world means that, one, you can hold power to account. Two, you can uncover what's happening to drive policy changes. And there's plenty of an example. There's a whole study called the CNN effect. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, where it's the disproportionate effect that 24-hour news channels at the time were having on government policies and things like this. Like, we have a campaign called the Freedom Project, which looks at modern day slavery. We've driven policy and law changes, in countries around the world, and have had, charities funded, out of the content we've had. So, that's news, uncovering something and then driving real change, right? And then, of course, making sure that we know what's happening on in the world to live hopefully a better life through understanding and making decisions about what we do. And that could be something big around how we vote, right? Based on a policy against what's happening in a war. It could be a dinner table discussion over, like, what happened in sport. It could be where to travel next, right? So CNN is news, but actually, it's also, we have a lot of content, of course, in business, on travel, on style and fashion and art and architecture and all these things as well, right? And that's just a case of like, hey, let's education and culture and all of these things. So there's this kind of purpose for it. I'm not sure I answered your question, but you can tell I'm passionate about what I do, hopefully.
But this was the whole point. And that's why I asked you this question, actually. You remember when we were prepping, I said that smart people and educated people and hardworking people can be good at anything they try. But what I try to figure out is, why do you do what you do? Why do you care? Because if you care at it, then you have the potential to be great at it. Clearly, you're very great at this because you care, and you've just demonstrated that. And that's kind of why I asked. Again, it's not a political question. It's not that wasn't the point. The point was that there is an essence inside of what you do, that you care about it, that you wake up every day and care. It's not just like we press a button, we go home, right? That there is a mission there. And that's important for people to understand, right? Because I think at some point that gets lost, and I wanted to expose that, right? So that's important to me.
You nailed it.
Yeah. So talk to me now about the another elephant in the room. And I think it's going to be similar. No, because I think it's going to be similar to other industries, but I do like this sort of connectivity of like it's happening here in finance, it's happening in insurance, right? It's happening in writing. But how is artificial intelligence and generative AI affecting the way you at least think about your role in CNN's role and how that stuff gets used and deployed?
Yeah, I mean, I start from a place I mentioned earlier, which is like embrace, understand, learn, and make it work for you and your business, right? So I have that as my mantra, let's say, and try and get that across the teams and within the bit of the business that I influence. Um, 5 years ago was one of the sort of main launches, I suppose, of we have a tool called SAM and CEP. It stands for Semantic Analysis Moderator, catchy. And it's a machine learning tool that I mentioned. It links quite nicely to what we were just discussing, right? These programmatic platforms that block keywords are actually missing huge amounts of engaged audiences. And these are off the shelf technologies that are deciding these things, right? So, our view is, well, actually, it shouldn't be some tech platform judging what content is suitable for a brand or not. We understand why a brand might not want to be against, war versus football, of course, or soccer. So we built our own tool, right? We didn't want to have something off the shelf. So we built our own tool that really understands and uses machine learning to understand the sentiment of an article. The example I would give would be, a subject around cancer, let's say, right? It's very different having, an article around, the challenges and the death rates of cancer, how something might be increasing in a certain part of the world without access to healthcare. Very different to an article about an innovation which might be utilizing a new medicine or technology to uncover how to test for a cancer very early so it can be treated very early. That second article is positive. It has innovation in it. It has technology in it. All these things that brands want to be aligned with, right? But an off-the-shelf tool would block that one as well as the first one. So our tool understands whether an article has a positive sentiment or negative sentiment and unlocks these audiences. So
I like it.
pretty cool, right?
Go ahead.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, it's super cool. Because this is the other thing I want to ask you. If you go back to the beginning, because I saw this again, the same progression in my business when I was in financial services, at some point I realized we weren't a trading company anymore. And we weren't an M&A company anymore. We weren't an investment banking business. We were a tech business. And in the same way that this kind of loops back to something you said earlier in our conversation, but you said like people had to be smarter. I presume you actually had to hire different people. We went from hiring, I always call them like wise guys from Brooklyn to be traders. That's what it was, though. You could say whatever you want. You send me an email if you don't like what I said. But the flip side of that is, by the time I was leaving the business, we were hiring PhDs from MIT to sit on the trading desk because if they didn't understand the tech and they couldn't write the algorithms, they didn't understand how the back end was working, they couldn't do the trading. And that's not just on your side, the programmatic stuff, but I do believe that like the tech teams must have really expanded bigger because all the stuff you're doing now is tech related. Did that kind of surprise you, not just from an AI perspective, but just overall? You're like, before there were 3 you guys, now there are 30 of you.
Yeah. Big time. All the operational tech teams have obviously grown, to an extraordinary amount. And our version of your wise guys were lads. We'd call them lads in London, right? I have a global role, but I've always been based in London. We'd call them lads, right? And they're kind of what I was, to be honest. I would say at sports, in sports, like going to the pub, which we all do in London too much, right? A bit loud, and we'd go out and get excited and loud in the office. And there's still a nice portion of that. And that gives like a really fun, exciting culture to be in. But all those lads now, they may not be, operating the platforms, but they definitely understand what the platforms do for our clients. And then the other side is, absolutely. There are PhDs in the office. Of course, there are the tech team, that have, either studied some sort of engineering, software engineering, as well as just, I suppose, operational leaders. That's grown hugely, and the biggest part of my team now is that right. So and again, they're smart and they get paid well, and that uplifts the industry and so on. So, from an AI point of view, going sort of looping back round, I spoke about that 5 years ago. What we did there, that tool is just getting smarter and smarter, right? And we have a job to make sure our clients know about it. But now, in the creative studio, they used to edit by hand. Oh, this one object is in the screen, right? And they spend hours, right, taking this thing out. They just press a button now, color grading in that as well, right? So it means they can focus on the storytelling, and maybe they are, getting some of that story from generative AI, and then looping that into the narrative itself. Always checking it and sense checking it. We're very fact driven, of course, but it's just driving efficiencies and meaning that people getting smarter, understanding these technologies. We're going to be hiring new people, and everyone's able to do a better job, and therefore maybe, arguably, a smarter workforce gets paid more. People are happier. All these things.
Yeah, and look, George Lucas did this in the 1970s, right? With his imagine, I can't remember the name of it, Illusion something studio, right? Where when he was making Star Wars, people would go in when Star Wars first came out, and they saw that spaceship just kind of hovering over them. It blew people's minds. And back then, that CGI wasn't so great, but it's the same thing, right? And I think this is, you were making fun of me a little bit earlier when I said I was older than you. You were like, yeah, you look like you are. But one of the benefits of
Not
this
that much.
but one of the benefits of this actually is that you see multiple cycles. And I think for you as well, the more you see these sort of business cycles and technical cycles, you're now able to adapt much more quickly, because you're like, this is the thing that's going to work and these things are not going to work, because I understand where they fit in, and I understand, like, in the past how this has happened. And I think because the tech world is moving so much faster now than it used to, you have to make those decisions faster. And I think it's easier for guys like you that have a lot of experience because you've seen the cycles. And that's the only point I was going to make.
Yeah,
Same thing with AI. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, it is always these cycles, and I feel like I can be optimistic about it because I remember, go back to those execs that I said, 3 people, billion ads, right? And everyone, but no, the sales teams have just got smarter and the other teams have grown and all these things. So look, of course there will be some other disruption. I'm sure there will be some negative parts of some of this rise of AI, but at least by understanding it, at least by trying to use it, be at the forefront of it, you give yourself a better chance of winning, that's for sure, rather than fighting it and being slow.
Absolutely. Look, I'm gonna end on that optimistic note. You have to come back. I'd love this conversation with you. I learned a ton. I had fun. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Rob Bradley is Senior VP, Digital Revenue Strategy and Operations at CNN International Commercial. You were awesome. I appreciate your time. Thank you again for doing this, man.
Thank you so much, Mark. I really enjoyed it. Anytime. I love the format. Great discussion. Cheers.